He arrived at dawn when the range is quiet enough to hear the wind move the flags. The poles creaked softly, metal complaining in its sleep. Even the gravel seemed hesitant underfoot, as if sound itself had been instructed to wait. The gate guard called my name the way you call for weather, flat, careful, as though saying it too loudly might make something worse arrive sooner. I saw him before the medics did. I always notice posture before faces. I knew it was him by the way he stood, one shoulder guarding the other, like a habit learned too early and never unlearned. His weight was wrong, shifted back as if he were bracing for a blow that wasn't coming anymore. He did not look around. He looked past things. That was new. His face was wrong. Not bruised, rearranged. Swollen into an unfamiliar geometry. Features pushed out of their remembered order. His jaw was wired shut, the metal crossing his mouth in tight, deliberate lines. When he tried to speak, the wires glittered briefly in the low light, catching like tinsel put somewhere it doesn't belong. Festive in the wrong way. I did not touch him. I am good at not touching things that can break, especially when they are already broken. The medics moved in with their practiced urgency, but he stopped one of them with his good hand and held out a phone to me. The screen was smeared with fingerprints. His fingers shook, though his arm didn't. I took it because that was easier than refusing. I didn't watch the whole thing. I never have. I stopped it at the moment I recognized the room, the old living room with the deer head mounted crookedly above the television, the cheap light stapled to the doorframe, blinking out of rhythm. Christmas Eve. Someone laughs off camera. Someone says my son's name like a joke, the way people say names when they want to see if they still have power. I handed the phone back without comment. He watched my face carefully, not for anger but for instruction. He has always been good at reading what comes next. 17, he said when I asked. His voice worked around the wires, reshaping itself to fit the damage. He didn't count them. He remembered the number because someone said it aloud, proud of the arithmetic, pleased with how cleanly it landed. My ex-wife filmed it. He didn't say that with anger. He said it like a report, like something that had already been filed and stamped and could not be appealed. We sat in the infirmary while the medics worked. The room smelled like antiseptic and old coffee. Machines hummed in steady, patient tones, the sound of systems doing what they were designed to do. I tried to remember the last time I'd taught a class about restraint without believing it myself. I could still hear my own voice explaining pressure points, escalation ladders, the theory that control is something you apply gradually, like force measured in ounces. It felt like a different instructor had said those things, a younger one, a man who thought principles survived contact. He slept, then woke, then slept again. His breathing changed when he dreamed. Between those intervals, I cataloged what I could control, paperwork, calls, the order in which I would ask questions later. I made lists without writing them down. I rehearsed sentences I would never say. Control levs in sequence. If you can decide what happens first, you can pretend the rest will follow. Outside, the flags snapped once, then settled. Morning advanced by inches. No one came in to offer comfort. No one needed to. People assume the moment breaks you. It doesn't. The moment sharpens you, pares you down to a usable edge. What breaks you is the hours after, when you realize clarity doesn't tell you what to do, only what you are capable of. I train people to end things efficiently. I say it like that because euphemisms rot the tongue. They soften edges that are meant to cut cleanly, and they teach people to lie to themselves before they ever lie to anyone else. I also train them to stop. Stopping is harder. Stopping costs more time, reputation, certainty. It asks you to hold force in your hands and not use it. It is easier to be decisive than to be precise. Precision requires memory. Decisiveness only requires permission. I waited 2 days. Not because I was unsure, but because waiting is a test. Urges announce themselves loudly at first. They want to be indulged, dramatized, resisted. I wanted to know what would happen if I did none of those things. I wanted to see whether the feeling would decay, whether it would be replaced by something more reasonable, something shaped like doubt. It didn't. I stood in front of a class that already knew my reputation and not much else. Reputation travels faster than explanation. It arrived in the room before I did, sat in the chairs, leaned back with its arms crossed. They were young enough to mistake confidence for courage, young enough to think fear only counts if you can feel it shaking your hands. They watched me the way people watch demonstrations, waiting for the moment when something irreversible happens. I asked a question I had no right to ask, and I framed it as judgment, not action. That matters. Judgment feels abstract. Action leaves fingerprints. Extra credit, I said, and watched 32 hands rise without hesitation. No glances exchanged, no calculations performed. Reflex, not thought. It wasn't the number that bothered me. It was the speed. Speed reveals what people are already prepared to do. It reveals how little distance there is between wanting and agreeing. I did not give instructions. I did not say what I wanted done. I did not say what I wanted at all. I gave addresses, written plainly, like a geography quiz. Street names, cross streets, times when people were usually home. I told them to think. I told them to remember the law, the cameras, the quiet witnesses that record without blinking. I told them about the paper trail, how it is always longer than you think, how it loops back years later when you believe you've outgrown it. I told them to leave nothing for me to clean up. They wrote everything down. Of course they did. People trust paper more than memory, even when memory is the thing they'll be judged by later. What I did not say mattered more than what I did. I did not say no. I did not say yes. I did not say why. Authority has a gravity. Even silence bends toward it. People fill the absence with whatever they are most comfortable believing. Some of them believed I was testing them. Some believed I was serious. A few believed both things at once. Those were the ones who scared me, though not enough to stop. After class, no one asked questions. That was its own answer. They filed out carefully, as if the room might remember them. I erased the board slowly. I have always preferred deliberate motions. They give you time to feel what you're doing before it's finished. That night, I went back to the infirmary. The building was quieter than it should have been, the kind of quiet that pretends to be rest. My son was awake, eyes tracking the ceiling as if it were a map he might someday need. His face looked more like itself in sleep, adjacent stillness, though the wires still caught the light. He didn't ask about the class. He didn't ask about anything that would require me to answer honestly. I told him nothing. He told me less. We are very good at that, the two of us. He asked if I was staying. I said yes, and meant it in every way except the one he needed most. I sat in the chair and listened to the machines hum, each sound a small, stubborn promise that something was still working. The next week did not unfold like a movie. There were no doors kicked in the middle of the night, no men shouting names down hallways, no neat confrontations where a lesson arrives on time. Nothing converged. Instead, things thinned out. The world did not react, it adjusted. Phone numbers stopped answering, not abruptly, but politely, as if calls were being routed into a longer future. Cars were impounded for reasons unrelated to Christmas, expired tags, unpaid fines that had existed for years without consequence until now. A workplace audit turned into a pause, which turned into a leave, which no one could quite explain without using the word temporary too many times. Two people entered witness protection under names that sounded like placeholders, syllables that belonged to no one. Someone was arrested on an old charge that had been waiting patiently for the right moment to matter. None of it pointed in the same direction. That was the point. When people say they went missing, what they mean is the noise stopped, messages dried up, schedules collapsed, familiar movements vanished from familiar places. Silence filled in where certainty should have been, and it was worse. Silence invites stories. Stories multiply when they don't have to compete with facts. People told themselves what made the most sense to them. People told themselves what allowed them to sleep. I did not correct anyone. My ex-wife checked herself into psychiatric care. Voluntary, the intake nurse said, as if that word explained the shape of the decision. The hospital smelled like disinfectant and patience, a clean, suspended smell that made time feel padded. I sat through none of the evaluations. I signed nothing. I spoke to no one beyond what was required to pass through doors. I learned that consequences do not ask permission before they arrive, and they do not announce whether they plan to stay. Her father called me 3 days later. He is a sheriff in a county where the roads go straight because there was never a reason to curve them. Flat land makes for honest distances. You can see who is coming long before they arrive. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He said my name like a fact, like something already written down. I know you did this, he said. There it was. The authority moment everyone imagines as a showdown. The badge, the accusation, the line in the sand. It wasn't any of that. It was an inquiry without a file, a man with a badge and a hole where certainty wanted to be. He was calling not to act, but to listen, to see if the truth would betray itself through tone, through timing, through the human need to explain. Prove it, I said, and then I stopped talking. Silence is not a taunt if you don't decorate it. I did not deny. I did not argue. I gave him nothing to work with but his own conviction, and conviction without evidence is just another story. He exhaled once. He did not say goodbye. There was a meeting I won't describe, because description would flatter it. It did not deserve narrative. It was administrative in nature, procedural in tone, and surgical in outcome. The system does not punish you when it can limit you. Punishment creates martyrs. Limitation creates compliance. My access narrowed. Password stopped working without explanation. My calendar emptied in a way that looked voluntary, as if I had chosen restraint as a lifestyle change. Invitations were not revoked, they were simply never sent. Control reversed not with a handcuff, but with a glance that said, "We are watching the space around you now." Not you. The space. The margins. The places you assume are neutral. I adjusted my routines. That is what professionals do when the rules shift without notice. I slept less. I listened more. I watched how people avoided eye contact, how conversations ended a second too early. None of it surprised me. Influence always comes with an invoice. It just arrives later than expected. It was only then that I understood what I had done by asking that question. Not the addresses, not the silence. The question itself. I had tested others and failed myself. I had mistaken influence for insulation. I had believed that proximity to power functioned like armor, when in fact it works like exposure. The closer you stand, the more visible you become. Nothing dramatic followed that realization. No collapse, no confession, just a recalibration. The quiet kind. The kind that lasts. My son healed unevenly. Bodies do that when damage is specific and time is not. Bones knit with obedient patience. X-rays improved. Doctors smiled in cautious increments. Nerves argued. Sensation returned in patches, arrived late to places it used to occupy without question. Pain learned new routes. His mouth healed around the wires, but not back into the version it had been. His laugh came back altered, like a song learned in a different key, recognizable, but shifted, carrying a note that hadn't been there before. He noticed it. I noticed that he noticed. He did not ask me what happened to the people who hurt him. He never asked directly. Questions circled, then landed elsewhere. I did not offer a version of events that would let me sleep better. I did not rehearse speeches about justice or inevitability. Silence, again, was the truest thing available. One afternoon, months later, we sat outside with coffee that went cold because neither of us noticed time passing. The day was mild in the way that makes weather feel incidental. The question wasn't an accusation. It wasn't even curiosity. It was inventory. He was trying to understand the emotional terrain he'd returned to see whether it had changed shape while he was gone. I was? I said. I am less. I didn't qualify it. I didn't explain the math. Anger reduced is still anger, but it no longer dictates terms. He nodded, as if that were a measurement he could use. As if anger were something with units, something you could track until it reached a safe range. He looked relieved, not because I had forgiven anyone, but because I hadn't disappeared into it. Justice, if that word applies here, arrived without choreography. No gavel moments, no speeches. Paper moved through offices. Some charges stuck, some didn't. Evidence aged in different ways depending on who touched it. Some people carried consequences that fit, proportioned and public. Some carried ones that didn't, heavy in the wrong places or light where weight would have mattered. The world did not rebalance itself to my satisfaction. It rarely does. Satisfaction is a childish metric. Systems don't recognize it. What I regained was not revenge. That would have been simple, clean in its own way. What I regained was dignity, the narrow kind that comes from refusing to become the thing that would have been easiest. The thing that would have matched the worst version of the story everyone was already telling. The urge never left. It didn't burn out. It learned to sit quietly, like a trained animal you do not trust, with your back turned. Training doesn't remove instinct. It teaches it where to lie down. I adapted to the limits placed around me. Some were lifted. Some weren't. That, too, is how things work. I taught again, though differently, less certainty. More emphasis on pause. I found myself repeating lessons I used to skim past, stopping, waiting. The discipline of doing nothing when something louder wants your attention. When the sheriff passed me in a hallway months later, he tipped his hat and said nothing. We did not exchange glances heavy with implication. We did not smile. Authority, when it's honest, does not need to be loud. It does not need witnesses. It recognizes restraint when it sees it, even if it does not absolve. At night, when the range is quiet, I listen to the flags again. I stand long enough for the sound to settle into something familiar. They make a sound like breath, fabric answering air, movement acknowledging pressure. It is not a signal. It is a reminder. I remind myself that stopping is part of the job, not the afterthought. The job. I remind myself that power is most undeniable when it chooses restraint, when it proves it can act and does not, and I stay.